What was it like getting to the set of Lost and watching them work on this show? How much did it differ from anything else that you had been a part of in terms of a pilot?
Oh, it was completely different from anything I'd been on. When I was driving onto set, or being driven actually, and seeing this downed plane in the middle of the beach and all the smoke and the fire and everyone running around, it was clearly this was something way bigger and the hugest job I've ever had.
Did that impress or intimidate you?
It intimidated me a lot. Like, I remember seeing it and bursting out laughing, which is usually how I handle being uncomfortable.
What I thought was interesting, you saying how big it is, watching the pilot again, I was just like kind of blown away with how even watching it on a small screen, you just kind of get the sense of the largeness from the opening shots. Like, you're kind of looking at Jack and you don't know what he's seeing, but you just have this sense of like some event. And I think it probably really I watched the show kind of late, but I feel like it probably really resonated with what's going on at the time. But it feels like nothing else that we've seen that we even qualify as TV. Maybe something now that we consider like a Netflix show or something that's a bigger project in television. Was there any sort of sense that what you were doing was different than just plain television?
Take that to Daniel.
Well, I think, nowadays the phrase, this TV show looks just like a movie, gets thrown out a lot, and everyone says, oh, our show is just like a movie. But, I think when we shot the pilot of Lost, that pilot really was shot like a movie, and it looked like a movie. From the scene that Jorge was talking about with the downed plane on the beach, to everything to... the way that the forest landscape was shot, and when that smoke monster was kind of knocking down the trees, you saw a huge overhead view, and then you were watching all of our characters just look out into the distance. So you're absolutely right when you say the scope of it was really large, and you got this just sense of how much was unknown, and that was exactly the experience that not only the characters were paralleling, but also the actors, because as Damon said, we didn't know a lot about our characters or even the script as we were shooting it.
So it's true what Damon said, essentially, Daniel, that they were writing the script as you were shooting the pilot. I mean, that must have been crazy to see the budget that's going into this thing that's also possibly being written on the spot.
It's true. I mean, and it was. We all had to take a leap of faith because our characters were not fully written, and so when I was hired for the job, there was a big element of trust us, and. Thankfully, Damon and Carlton and JJ did not disappoint.
Well, and one big thing, ABC was at such a low point going into that season, and with Lost and Desperate Housewives and Grey's Anatomy and everything that kind of rose it out of that rut. What were your reactions to the response to the pilot? It pulled in some 18 million viewers. What was the next day like, and how did the season unfold in terms of viewership throughout those 22 or 3 episodes?
Jorge, do you want to take that?
I remember being very excited the day after we premiered. Like, we were kind of crossing our fingers that we might get an audience about the size of Alias, because we're working for JJ, and we thought that might be a good standard to gauge with. And when we came out of the gate pretty strong, I kind of remember going to work the next day just smiling and being like, well, I hope you guys like Hawaii, because we might be around here for a while.
I think the clip we actually have here is how Jack was not killed. Let's roll the clip of how Jack did not die in the pilot.
You essentially kill off the main character and completely and totally communicate to the audience that anything can happen on the show. What a great twist that would be. And in fact, it had been done before. To give credit where credit is due, Steve McPherson, who was the head of Touchstone Television and then became the head of ABC when Lloyd left and decided to pick up Lost, his one real note on the outline was, if you want to kill Jack, but if you kill Jack, and Heather Caden really backed this play, another executive who we really trusted, the audience is not going to form attachments to these characters, because you'll shock them, but you'll basically make them like really care about this dude, and then he's going to get killed, and therefore it's going to be very hard for them to bond with anybody else in the future if you do that. And I think that when we first heard the note, we were like, "Rawr!" Like, we want to be different and special and screw those guys. But the more that we thought about it and talked about it, the more we realized that they were right.
Sean?
Yeah, I was interested to hear him talk about audience attachment, because it seems like more than any other show, maybe in history of television before or since, the audience was such an active aspect of the whole phenomenon, the theorizing and the attachments. And I'm curious, for you guys, was that a double-edged sword? I mean, did you like having that extreme investment in the ideas and the characters? Did it make it easier for you, or did you feel like you had to kind of guard yourself against how the audience might drag you along?
I think that was one of the greatest strengths of our show. I think the fact that our audience really identified with one or more of the characters is what carried them through all the twists and turns of the science fiction elements of it and the mythology of the show. No matter if you missed an episode or not, when you're standing around the water cooler the next day, you can always say, "Well, did you see what Hurley just did in that episode?" Or, "I finally understood, what the deal with Sawyer is." And to me, that was one of the things that I enjoyed most about my experience of acting on Lost 2. I was able to take a character that started in one direction and over the course of 6 years transform him into someone that no one would have expected. And, I've never had that chance before or since in that same way.
I'm curious, Jorge, they talk about in that clip just sort of that they were going to kill off this character in the pilot episode. They were going to kill the main character. So they clearly wanted to do as many twists and turns with the show. How often did you feel that your character was going to be killed off?
Well, actually, I remember reading in the original description of Hurley, they described him as a red shirt. So, Hurley wasn't going to make it through the pilot. But there was at some point that I remember that someone had a conversation later on in the series where I was guaranteed to survive. Like they said, okay, we're not going to kill Hurley because that would the audience would react so bad against that. And I was like, oh, that's good. It gives me a little bit of security.
So you essentially always felt safe going into the show and could look around the cast and be like, you guys are not nearly as safe.
I think
That's
part
very
of the
true.
great thing of the show and having that thread at the beginning, and also the first season, our first death was highly publicized, and we're sitting around going like, man, they're making a big deal about one of our friends basically getting fired, but it's just kind of like part of making an island where you have to believe the danger of the island. I think was the big deal.
Jorge, I feel like out of all the characters in Lost, you might have been one of the biggest fan favorites, and it's sort of, you kind of come in as the audience comes in. Like when I was watching the pilot again, when Kate was sewing up Jack and he's talking about ripping open that girl's spinal fluid sac and it coming out like angel hair pasta, I was like, oh, I feel like Hurley, like I'm gonna barf if he keeps talking about this. And like you're really who we identified with, and you come out as sort of the owner of the island at the end. I was wondering if there's sort of any sense that you had that you sort of really related to the experience of sort of being the voice of the audience?
Well, early on, I definitely saw that I kind of received that mantle when I got to be the one who got to ask Jack, so is it a dinosaur, about the thing that's out in the woods? And I go, this may become my role in this show, to be the one that asks what everyone's thinking.
I want to know what driving the Dharma vans were like. Like, that's like stunt driving in a large contraption and in this vast expanse of land. Can you just talk to me about what it was like to block and then film those scenes?
It's always, they're always stick shifts, and they're always really old. So, like, it's one of those stick shifts that you have to kind of learn as to where the sweet spot on the clutch is. And so that's always a bit of a challenge, but luckily I start going downhill on a ramp, so everything kind of got going for me before.
Daniel, you mentioned that as the series progressed, your character evolved a great deal. And it's not just that you evolved. I felt like, in the early episodes, you're one of the villains of the piece. You're a heavy. And, by the time you have your final episode, your death is like, I cried. I'll admit it. So, but that is revealed in these flashbacks that kind of get parceled out one at a time every so often. As an actor, how do you craft that role so that when you do get this new revelation handed to you in a script, you're drawing on something that was already present in your performance?
Well, I mean, as I've said many times, it was a gift to be able to play the character this way because, you know, when you're working on a TV show, a lot of the times your character is set episode to episode. And, you know, when you're working on stage or doing a play, your character lives, you know, over the course of 2 or 3 hours and the arc completes itself there. But, you know, I guess to answer your question, the way that I dealt with how the character was changing was just the way I would real life, you know. I have a sense of who my character is when I wake up in the morning or what my character is, and but I don't know what the events of the day are going to be. And so I played Jin that way, you know, whenever I got a script. And unlike Jorge, I felt like I was in jeopardy through every episode. So I would pace through. And the first thing I would look at was, do I survive? That would be question number one. And but, you know, whatever was written for me, I would kind of take in and learn as part of my character and just literally do it day by day, episode by episode. And I'm just really grateful that Damon and the writers really took care of the character and really made him someone, you know, that the audience cheered for at the end.
Daniel, this is a question for you. Kind of going off what you said, we watch so many shows now, like we binge on them, and I know that was Lost, you know, a couple of the seasons, but I was wondering if there's any way you would sort of think of the character differently or put anything differently into the role if you knew that all these episodes would be released at once, or if the whole first season would have been like watched at once.
That's a really good question. I mean, and I don't think there would be anything I could do given the way that the scripts were kind of parceled out. Mm-hmm. If I'd gotten all the scripts at one time, there might have been a few choices I would have made differently, but I gotta say, not many, because the character was well written enough that they really did take into account what I might have known as an actor and what I might not have known as an actor. And, you know, just like life, I think it's nice to watch every day unfold.
I'm curious, have either of you gone back and watched the pilot since working on it?
It's funny that you ask because I just watched it 2 days ago because my son, who was too young to watch it at the time it aired originally, has taken an interest in it, and so we sat down and watched it together.
How does it hold up for your son?
I am amazed, honestly, at how much I liked it. And my son was really, he was blown away by it. And my son, you know, he's a pretty savvy TV watcher now in the age of Netflix and all of that other stuff. He can watch, you know, really good quality TV, and I really think it holds up. I really enjoyed the experience, and now, after 10 years, I have enough distance from it where I could watch it more as an audience member that wasn't so invested in it at the time. And I think it's one of the best episodes of television I've ever seen, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Even in knowing the actual ending of the show, it still works. It still punches when he says, "Where are we?" Jorge, what was it like when you went back and watched it, if you have? Have you?
I actually haven't seen the pilot. I feel like if I went back and watched the pilot, most of my stuff is going to be like, oh my gosh, we all look like babies.
I'm curious, Jorge, looking back now in 10 years, what do you think the legacy of the show is? I know that the three of us, as we were sitting together in the green room, talked about something like True Detective, say, as evoking a lot of those same kind of responses in the audience, having these messages and clues people were looking for, having the sense of mystery. Like, do you see Lost's influence or footprint on other shows that you've seen since then?
I mean, I remember seeing it a lot the first, like, 1 or 2 pilot seasons after we had already aired and after we had found our audience. Because there were a lot of shows that you could tell that kind of Lost essentially paved the way for. A lot of them aren't around anymore. But suddenly there was a strong, you know, science fiction themed influx in like fall TV. Mm-hmm. And that was really great. I don't know, like every time that I hear someone talking about this golden age of TV thing that's been happening in recent years, and when they mention Lost as part of the list as to shows that attribute to that, I'm just always, you know, kind of proud to be a part of it.